instance, in Tana River County, Ford Kenya won one MCA seat and was allocated one nomination slot. In the same county, Wiper Democratic Movement won 2 MCA slots, but was not allocated any nomination slot. Similar cases clearly. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We can actually take a seat. Eh? Yeah. So, let our brother take a seat. He's been repucrating very well. I will repeat. We have noted several cases of disproportionate allocation of nomination slots for MCAs to political parties across the country. For instance, in Tana River County, Ford Kenya won one MCA seat and was allocated one nomination slot. In the same county, Wiper Democratic Movement won 2 MCA slots, but was not allocated any nomination slot. And I think this list is growing by the day. We have seen cases of people without the necessary qualification. Saw it in the media today. Some cooks are given positions. And I think it is important we also, whereas our cooks are very important, they give us food. But I think that it's good to allow them to pursue that line so one can become a chef and even get international jobs. But to give them legislative responsibility, I think is diverting their strong attributes. Similar cases clearly. So, Senator Ososi just come in behind Senator Ombua. So, one more. Nabi Nambwera. Thank you, Nabi. I remember you yesterday when you stood on a point of order. Yeah, thank you. I'm therefore going to read the resolutions of the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party Parliamentary Group meeting, which was held yesterday and today, comes to an end, 16th and 17th of September 2022. The Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party has successfully concluded a 2-day parliamentary group meeting in Machakos County. In the meeting, the parliamentary group took stock of the state of the nation and developed its plan for the 13th parliament. From the outset, we wish to associate ourselves fully with the remarks of the Right Honorable Raila Odinga when he opened the meeting. The Right Honorable Odinga's speech has brought to the fore very pertinent issues that should form the basis of serious national discourse going forward. For the avoidance of doubt, Azimio Oka is legally and legitimately the majority coalition in the National Assembly. This is not a matter for determination by any individual or office. It is simple arithmetic. And so to settle this matter and put the record straight once and for all, members of Parliament belonging to the Azimio Oka coalition have been properly advised to take up majority roles and responsibilities in and out of the National Assembly chamber. The RUTO administration has started off on the wrong footing on almost every front. Most painful to the ordinary Kenyan is the declaration that Kenya Kwanza will not subsidize consumption, but will channel subsidies to production. What a quick about turn against the ordinary Kenyan struggling to afford a basic meal a day. A government that can't feed our people has no business being in office. The import of this statement by the RUTO administration is that this government is committed to collecting taxes from the suffering masses to give a lifeline to big manufacturers of food and non-food items. The question to ask is Who are these producers going to be selling their products to, since the ordinary Kenyan can hardly afford a simple meal? Why has the hustler, quote-unquote, narrative disappeared so soon? In a blatant but ill-advised move to placate the judiciary and further weaken the legislature, the president has done the unthinkable. He has purported to allocate the judiciary some token funds to ostensibly move forward the agenda of an independent institution. This is a mockery of the basic intelligence of consumers of justice and must be seen for what it is. Financial and operational autonomy of the judiciary cannot and will not be guaranteed by tokenism. It can only be assured by creating an environment that guarantees clear separation of powers between the three arms of government. And whereas funds are necessary for effective dispensation of justice, it is not the business of a president acting in isolation to allocate funds to the judiciary. Appropriation of funds to public institutions is a constitutional mandate of Parliament. The president must tame his appetite for throwing money at institutions to buy friendship. He must keep up the judiciary and let the legislature do its work. As part of the RUTO administration's vindictive agenda, plans have already been initiated to hound out of office the 4 IEBC commissioners, namely Juliana Cherera, Francis Wanderi, Irene Masit, and Justice Nyang'aya, plus the Deputy CEO, very hard-working Madam Ruth Kulundu, for refusing to toe the line. We totally condemn this brazen act of witch hunt and demand that the President and his agents leave those officers alone. On our part, we commit to do whatever it takes to protect those officers from any attempts to infringe their basic rights. We have noted several cases of disproportionate allocation of nomination slots for MCAs to political parties across the country. For instance, in Tana River County, Ford Kenya won 1 MCA seat and was allocated 1 nomination slot. In the same county, Wiper Democratic Movement won 2 MCA slots but was not allocated any nomination slot. Similar cases clearly... Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We can actually take a seat, eh? Yeah. So, let our brother take a seat. He's been repudiated. Very well. I will repeat, We have noted several cases of disproportionate allocation of nomination slots for MCAs to political parties across the country. For instance, in Tana River County, Ford Kenya won 1 MCA seat and was allocated 1 nomination slot. In the same county, Wiper Democratic Movement won 2 MCA slots but was not allocated any nomination slot. And I think this list is growing by the day. We have seen cases of people without the necessary qualification. So it's in the media today. Some cooks are given positions. And I think it is important we also, whereas our cooks are very important, they give us food. But I think that it's good to allow them to pursue that line so one can become a chef and even get international jobs. But to give them legislative responsibility, I think is diverting their strong attributes. Similar cases clearly designed to disadvantage Azimio Oka abound across the country. And here I can also mention that Jubilee in the Senate won 5 slots, and they were given 1 nomination slot. And And if you are to round up a 0.7, I'm told they are taking this matter elsewhere in court, which is appropriate. I think UDM had 2. There are 2 and they got a slot. So you wonder what is really happening with IBC. Is it business as usual? Several attempts to have dialogue with the IBC to resolve these issues have not been successful. We demand that the IBC moves with speed to correct those anomalies, failure to which we shall be forced to take our own action to have the situation remedied. We have heard with consternation pronouncements from the Order Brigade calling on the DCI to keep off public offices and retreat to their headquarters. Apart from interfering with the independence of the National Police Service, we take such edicts to mean the room is now being officially created for looting of public resources to go on without hindrance. We demand the immediate retraction of those backward orders and reiterate our resolve to defend the independence of the police and all other independent institutions. We have also noted with concern the return of roadside declarations as official channel of espousing government policy. This is happening even before a cabinet that meets the dictates of the Constitution is in place. This should worry every well-meaning Kenyan. Finally, let it be known to all and sundry, the leaders in Azimio Oka are not interested in any jobs whatsoever from the executive. We already have a lot of work to do, as we have demonstrated even this afternoon, keeping the executive under check. And truth be told, the insinuation from a section of Kenya Kwanza leadership that legislators allied to them are in government any more than those allied to Azimio Oka is a demonstration of lack of understanding of the basic principles of Constitution 2010 on their part. The legislature is an arm of government, and all legislators have a constitutional mandate to oversight the executive arm of government. In conclusion, we now have the pleasure to unveil the leaders of Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party in the 13th Parliament. At the level of the National Assembly, we announce the leader of majority as Honorable Opiyo Wandayi. We announce Deputy Leader of Majority, Honorable Robert Mbui. The Chief Whip, Honorable Junet Mohammed. Deputy Chief Minority Whip, Honorable Sabina Chege. At the Senate, because we recognize we are down by only one senator, the Leader of Minority is Honorable Stuart Mazayo, Senator for Kilifi, and Deputy Leader of Minority, Honorable Enoch Wambua. Chief Minority Whip, Honorable Fatuma Dulo, Senator for Isiolo, and the Deputy Chief Minority Whip, Honorable Edwin Sifuna. Thank you, and may God bless Kenya. Actually, ni hayo tu. Thank you.
it to the 349 for the National Assembly and the 67 for the Senate that we have today. So briefly speaking, that's an overview of how our parliament evolves. We then must speak of what is the mandate of that house. In historical terms, power in many ancient societies was vested in the monarch only. We've seen that in the UK. If you study many other societies, France included, you'll find that is the origin of power. And I'll deal with the question of power and deal with the question of function simultaneously, because the two go hand in hand, as I was taught by my very good teacher, Justice Jackton Boma Ojwang. The nature of fused power is that it is very easy to abuse. Scholars like Baron de Montesquieu have argued that when you fuse all the functions of the state into one and the same body of hands, everything comes to an end. You can't guarantee liberties, you can't have responsible use of power, and so forth and so on. So this French philosopher, who coincidentally was also a speaker of the French Parliament, Baron de Montesquieu, wrote an interesting treatise called L'Esprit de Loi, the spirit of the laws. And in the spirit of the laws, he created a three-legged stool, a stool with three legs. And he said these three legs represent the powers, the functions of the state: the legislative, the federative, and the judicial. What you call the executive power, the legislative power, and the judicial power. The existence of that formation is important for the stability of that stool. Those of you who bear in mind the traditional African stool can imagine the inconvenience of having to sit onto that stool when any of those three legs is removed. It will become impossible. So the proper functioning of the state then requires that each of those three legs are properly working, properly functioning, and discharging their mandate. It is in the context of that I want us to look at the general mandate and roles of Parliament and of the members of Parliament. Broadly speaking, we can say there are three: representation, whether they are your people who elected you or the special interests that you are nominated to represent; legislation, and I thank God the Speaker has mentioned it here today, that it's a very good thing to have your name associated with a particular legislation. And let me tell you something about parliamentary practice as I study it. The Westminster parliamentary practice, which we borrowed from, has a very good tradition. If you sponsor a bill through the House, that bill has its formal name, both in its long title, that place you see saying an Act of Parliament 2, then it says what it wants to do, the long title, the short title, I can say the Traffic Act. But it also assumes your name. You come across things called the Njoki Bill, for example, the Donde Bill. So the Westminster practice has a way to, we honor those who lead important practices in the houses of representation, which is the same thing that if we set up a special committee of the House and appoint you the chair, that's an important honor that the report of that committee goes with your name as well. It goes, so you have the Mwangale committee, for example. So these are important practices that help you as members of Parliament to immortalize yourself, because long after you are gone, your name lives on through permanent parliamentary records. Another important thing is just the tradition of Parliament keeping a Hansard, a verbatim record of what you say, where even when you mumble, the staff would capture it and say mumbles, and we will forever know you mumbled. So there's a permanent record, and therefore you have an opportunity to immortalize yourself through the parliamentary process. It's not like minutes of a meeting as we know it, where the secretary may omit some of the things you say. The parliamentary practice is so designed to make you immortalized. And therefore, the only thing standing between you and your immortalization is yourself. If you don't seize the moment, to, be the face of a particular bill in the House, sponsor it, or be the face of a particular committee report in the House, or be the speak in the House, so that you are documented in the Hansard and you are accordingly immortalized. Having said that, and before without going to regurgitate all this, there are some reminders I want to make. Number one, you sit here as a member of parliament. That's the office you hold. But by virtue of being a member of parliament, you are a state officer and a public officer. Again, you are a person and a citizen. You are also a voter. So you remain a college of all these attributes throughout your membership to this important house that's sometimes called the August House. Your role, therefore, as a member of parliament is inclusive of the obligations of a person, the obligations of a citizen, and the obligations of a state officer and a public officer. Your duties, therefore, must be understood in that context. That your duties as a member of parliament include the duties of a person and the duties of state organs, because parliament is a state organ, working through its guiding soul and consciousness, who is you, the person. Then the duties of voters, the duties of citizens. Among the overriding duties, as I could pick them, is Article 3 of the Constitution. It is the obligation of every person to respect, uphold, and defend the Constitution. Every person has an obligation to respect, uphold, and defend the Constitution. If I had time, I would unbundle what these concepts mean in human rights parlance, and there's a reason why the drafter uses them separately. They don't mean one and the same thing. If you go to Article 94 of the Constitution, it specifically obligates Parliament to protect the Constitution and promote the democratic governance of the Republic. To protect the Constitution and to promote the democratic governance of the Republic. Those of us who either not sit in Parliament or don't yet have an opportunity there or have no ambition of sitting there will nevertheless, while sitting outside there, judge you against these standards and these parameters. When you say something, we shall ask, to what extent is what you are saying fostering the obligation to promote democratic governance of the Republic? To what extent is it protecting the Constitution? If you look at Article 21 of the Constitution, it provides that it is a fundamental duty of every state organ, I'm just picking that one because I've already categorized you as a state organ, being Parliament, to observe, respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights and fundamental freedoms in the Bill of Rights. Of course, for you, as legislators, the easiest bit, my friend used to tell me that it's not possible for everyone to do everything. And therefore, if you are a carpenter and you are holding a hammer, when you see a problem, you just see it's a nail. You want to hammer it. That's what you do every day. For me as a lawyer, when I see a problem in the governance realm, I keep asking, can I draft a pleading and take it to Judge Musinga and see whether he can pronounce itself on it? That's the tool for me that I would use easily. For you as a legislator, you have powers, we have said. You have legislative power. You may say, is it possible for this problem to be resolved by law because I have legislative power? Or is it possible for this problem to be resolved by a question? And questions play very important roles. I'll just take a minute to address that so that you understand the significance of just a question. Sometimes, we always underestimate our powers. Sometimes. When I was fairly young in practice, this is my experience with Justice Musinga many years ago. I had not mentioned this to him, but I have to say it. He was a judge of the High Court, and I was a junior lecturer at the Kenya School of Law. So one day, I left class at the Kenya School of Law and saw a lot of noise on Mtandao, isn't it? that the President of Kenya had just appointed the Chief Justice, nominated the Chief Justice, the Attorney General, Director of Public Prosecutions, and Control of Budget, just alone. So I know Honorable Mudwale remembers that episode. And there was a lot of noise. People were calling press conferences at Parliament and declaring that is unlawful. Others calling press conferences and praising it. And I remember a friend of mine called me and asked, Mr. Ngoya, are we completely helpless in this situation? And if you live in a society like ours with multiple challenges, it is very easy to regard yourself as helpless. It's very easy because the problems are many. From the ones the speaker mentioned, the people thinking you are the undertaker, to the source of all food in the village. Villagers wake up to come to your house to eat food, to a local ATM, even in villages where there are no ATMs, and so forth. You may think this is just too much. So I asked her, you know, for me and you, she was a lawyer. For you and me, we only have one tool. Some of us can't go to the streets, just natural. It's not everybody's strength, so we can't go to the streets. If you call a press conference, some of us are not that popular. The media will not even come, so we can't even read a press conference. So what do? I said, but you and me have a voice in court. If you sat with me tonight and we prepare something called a petition and went to court, somebody will hear us, number one. Number two, we may win or we may not win the case. But my very good teacher, Feroz Noroji, had taught me years earlier that you don't go to court to win cases all the time. Sometimes you go to court because court is a platform. When you speak, people listen. So that media, which if you call a press conference cannot come, now will be in court, listening to you and telling the public what you are saying. So it's just the platform. So we prepared a petition overnight. The following morning, we were before Judge Musinga. I remember many questions he asked me. I don't say them here and now because he's a friend of mine. And he told us to go and serve the Attorney General and come back at 3. We served the Attorney General, came back at 3. He gave an interim order stopping any further processing of those names, so Parliament could not deal with those names. We had injuncted Parliament. We are very bad people sometimes. We injunct Parliament. And the following day, the President came and recalled those names. So we kept asking ourselves, is it that easy? I mean, it is very easy to be impactful as a citizen so long as you regard the little privilege society has given you as important. So, what I'm saying is this. Many times, there are people in your village, and I trust you know this, and please don't begrudge them. It is not for no reason that your villagers believe you can solve all their problems. It's for a very good reason. Our socio-economic structure is very fragile. And it has a bulk of vulnerable men and women, vulnerable people, who do not know where the next meal will come from. They are part of that audience. So they can't go to court because court has filing fees and the procedures for getting exemption are convoluted and the lawyers have become too selfish so they can't take up their matters pro bono. So the next person is Mheshimiwa. At least Mwananchi knows he gave you his vote. So you can't do much about it. So that is the atmosphere you are in. And therefore, you come across, such people have said are vulnerable, they can easily be abused, they are often abused. So you'll come across a chief who is abusing citizens through simple things. He can't give them burial permits. It's a simple piece of paper that they require to bury their dead relative. Those people fear hearing their names mentioned by you in Parliament. If you just mention that I want this question answered, Mr. Ongoya, chief of Esrabe village, why is he doing ABSD? He will immediately issue that burial permit. You see, you have solved the problem. So don't take for granted the power that you have. The power that you have does not lie in you, thank you, doing philosophical things. Don't scratch your head so high that you want to make an economic recovery strategy law as a person that will make Kenyans owing to other countries to come from 10 trillion to nil for you to be remembered. Some of us will remember you by the very simple question that made the village primary school headmaster stop chasing away children from school. That is the power that you have. It is immense power, good people. Remember this. The Deputy Speaker mentioned it. 50 million Kenyans, only you have an opportunity to stand in that chamber and ask that question. 349. I mean, I'm not a very good mathematician. That's why I studied law out of an engineer. But those of you who are mathematicians, what percentage is that? 349 or 50 million? It is what we call in statistics negligible. You hold such a privileged position that if I have to have any sway on your behavior and your thinking, it is to constantly remember that you are that important. To constantly remember that you are that important. I tell this to judges of the Supreme Court. I tell this to Court of Appeal judges, because if the whole country, 50 million people, only 29 or 30 of you are Court of Appeal judges, that's an extremely privileged position. You must use it very responsibly. Allow me, so I don't take much time, to just remind you one thing. You'll remember the oath you took a couple of days ago. It obligates you to obey, respect, uphold, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. I think that summarizes it up for me in your obligation number 1. We are all human beings, and we all sometimes fall short of expectations. But I think what is important for me is not whether or not once in a while you fail short of expectations or people perceive you to be failing short of expectations, whether at your heart of hearts you have committed yourself to be able to discharge your functions under that Constitution. The power that you exercise is also public trust. And you can see that in your oath of office. You promise in that oath to bear true faith and allegiance to the people in the Republic of Kenya. That's the trust that you carry with yourself. You look at Article 1. That power belongs to and is derived from the people of Kenya. If you look at Chapter 6, Article 73, that power is a public trust. Then more importantly, Article 94, it says the legislative authority of the Republic is derived from the people and at the national level is vested in and exercised by Parliament. Now, those of us who are commercial lawyers know what we call the principal-agent relationship. It means the source of the power is the principal, the people. But you are the agent. You are the trustee. Then it also says, so that's the lawmaking power. It says, Parliament manifests the diversity of the nation and represents the will of the people. Allow me to just, in closing on this chapter, reflect a little on the law on trust. The law of trust generally, which then binds you as a trustee, obligates every trustee to do the following. 1, to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries all the time. To ask who are the beneficiaries under this trust and to act in their best interest. 2, to exercise reasonable care and skill. Reasonable care and skill. To avoid conflict of interests. And not to profit from the trust. And to act in good faith and with honesty and integrity. And to comply with the terms of the trust document. And at all times to inform the beneficiaries of their position and to provide such information concerning the trust as the beneficiaries are entitled to. Some of these things can be legislated. Some of these things cannot be legislated. And let me tell you, you cannot legislate good manners. So speaking as a voter and as a citizen, I will also be beseeching us to act as men and women of good manners all the time. I've mentioned oversight. Oversight is important and it takes multiple forms. You begin with powers of the High Court, for example, to summon witnesses. That's immense power. Summon witnesses, and they have obligation to come. Whether you do it in camera or in public, imagine yourself just before you are once elected to Parliament. Imagine yourself when you met a police constable, the OCS, or the Inspector General of Police. I grew up in the village myself, and I saw our people had a relationship of the police with the police that was very funny. Whenever they saw a policeman, they began running away, because meeting a policeman was tantamount to engaging in uncalled for trouble. And probably you were in that category some time back. Today, you can summon the Inspector General of Police, and he comes. I mean, that's immense power. That's oversight power. And I've told you, it comes from such sophisticated manifestations to simple manifestations of just asking a question. People fear hearing their names mentioned in Parliament. So I'll not want to dig so deep in that in the interest of time, but let's reflect on those things. Enacting legislation is an important function that we have, and they deal with everything. Speaker has mentioned it here. You can legislate Andengu law. You can legislate on that problem affecting your people. You can legislate on it. You can draft a bill around it and legislate on it and provide a framework for solution of the problems for your people. I speak as a Mwananchi now. Mwananchi sometimes get very frustrated. Sometimes they hear you complaining. Then they keep asking, okay, if Mheshimiwa is complaining, what does he want us to do? I am enlightened enough to know that although you have power, you don't have all power, and you oftentimes get just as frustrated as I do. But my grandmother in a Sarabe village may not understand, and yet you also represent them. So they expect you to complain less and craft solutions a little more, and we better keep that at the back of our mind. To discharge your functions properly, you will need very good relationship with your sister house, the Senate. And let me tell you, you are very privileged. You're extremely privileged, because when the Senate filed a case in the High Court to challenge certain behavior of the National Assembly, I was retained by some of the NGOs that were involved in the matter to represent them, so I was present in the case. And today, the member of the National Assembly, the member of the Senate, the then majority leader of the Senate, minority leader of the Senate, that advanced that course is your speaker here. It is important because of what I've said elsewhere. I know there's a topic here on diplomacy. I keep telling people diplomacy may sound like a very sophisticated thing, but all diplomacy is very personal. It's just about how people relate personally. And the speaker has said in my hearing, he has an open door. Meaning, where there were those rough edges, you could actually knock in his door and say, how can we relate better? He knows better what the other side is thinking. So that if you improve your relationship with your sister house, you enhance your capability to discharge your functions. Allow me to reflect briefly on powers and privileges, because I consider it to be important. And anytime somebody gives you a function, anytime somebody gives you a duty, an obligation, I was taught in constitutional theory, ask that person to add you powers, because it is impossible to perform functions without powers. Even when you are a class monitor or a class prefect, sure, you must have the power to write the names of noisemakers down. That's the only thing that enables you to manage that class. So, power is an important enabler to enable you discharge your functions. The only legitimate purpose for which power can be exercised is for the performance of the functions. I say this because the subject of powers and privileges is a subject that has sometimes been controversial. It is important, for example, for you to be able to speak freely in Parliament, speak freely, without the fear that you are going to be sued for defamation. It's important. If you have to look over your shoulder, if you have to measure your vocabulary very clearly, then you will feel hamstrung. So it's important that you are able to speak freely in the House. And therefore, the right to free speech is an important privilege that you enjoy as a member of the National Assembly. And you will derive these powers, privileges, and immunities from the following sources. The Constitution gives you. The Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act gives you. The standing orders give you these powers and privileges. And the rulings of the speakers of the House give you. It is because, if you look at standing order number 1, the speaker has decisional power. That decisional power is interpretive power. That if there is a controversy about the meaning of the bundle of, the speaker interprets and unbundles those powers. So the ruling of the speaker becomes an important source of reference when you want to know the scope of your powers and your privileges. And I've told you those powers and privileges have significant origins in the United Kingdom. I'll just give you some of the sources for your own reading because time is on my side. If you look at Article 94 of the Constitution, it gives you the power to make law. Article 117 of the Constitution gives you freedom of speech and debate in Parliament. Freedom of speech and debate. I dare say this is perhaps the most important right you have as a member of Parliament. Because those of us who theorize a little as academics say that you can categorize rights broadly into 2. Fundamental rights and instrumental rights. Instrumental rights are equally fundamental, but they are instrumental because they enable the realization, the fulfillment of the fundamental rights. So that your oversight power, your lawmaking power, your representation power is nothing without you being enabled with free speech. I keep telling academics that, we write books, we pontificate, because other people make biscuits elsewhere. In Parliament, you don't make biscuits. So what do? You speak. You discharge your functions through speech. Article 118, which gives you power to exclude strangers from the chambers. And look at that privilege. No one can ever call you a stranger unless and until you so offend the law that the Speaker and his Powers and Privileges Committee decide to deal with you as empowered by law. But whether the Speaker likes your face, whether the Speaker likes your height, he can't do anything about it. You must enter that Parliament and be there. That's an important privilege. It doesn't matter your political formation. The Speaker can never say once that, I don't like of this political formation. No. And if you follow a political formation in South Africa called the Economic Freedom Fighters, you'll see what I'm talking about. There are people who can really make noise in there, but they are there and they remain there. Article 124 of the Constitution, the power to establish committees. Article 125 of the Constitution, you will see the powers as they evolve. Then you have the immunities. They shield you from adverse action for proper use of this power. So you'll find the immunities in the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act of 2017. It gives you multiple privileges. It gives you multiple immunities, including whether you can be served in the presence of the House, whether you can be arrested in the presence of the House, whether proceedings can be brought against you for words spoken or written in a report of a Parliament or committee. Allow me to come to something that is important because we may miss it. There are limits to these powers, privileges, and immunities. Why are there limits to it? One is Article 2 of the Constitution. It says, anything in contravention of this Constitution is null and void. So that if you do something that is unconstitutional, then that is null. That is not part of what the enabling law seeks to protect. And I'll share with you just one case that has been determined by our Court of Appeal now. and the Court of Appeal determined this case some time back, the case of Eric Gorsungu versus George Odinga Oraro, senior counsel, you may know him. And many of you remember that there is a death that we are yet to resolve in this country, the death of the late Robert Ouko. Many of you remember there have been various attempts at investigations and inquiries into that death. Many of you remember that Parliament in the year 2003 or 2004 set up a committee to investigate the death of that citizen, and the chair of that committee was a man called Eric Gorsungu. Something interesting happened. Of course, he was chair of a committee, so he's chairing parliamentary committee. He's in parliamentary business. He's entitled to the privileges and the immunities of the House. Then, in the course of the proceedings of that committee, my very good friend, senior counsel George Oraro, was adversely mentioned. And he got his lawyers to write to the committee and say, I now want to appear before the committee and also have my version of the story heard. That committee was meeting somewhere. I'm not certain whether it was Naivasha. I'll cross-check that fact. On a Saturday, the chair of the committee came to Parliament buildings, called the press, and gave a press statement. The press statement read, I can assure you that we are getting to the bottom of this matter, and hence the hula baloo we are hearing outside there. That is why there's a lot of hassle, because they know we are going to find the truth, and the truth we shall find. I do not want to say anything more, but I have evidence, eyewitnesses. There is a concerted effort by people within and outside Parliament, particularly those that have been mentioned, to put some spanner in the works so that this thing cannot go on. And I can assure you, we are not going to stop. We'll go on, and nobody is going to dictate to us in which manner we are going to call witnesses. I can assure them they will be accorded the chance, the opportunity to say what they want to say, and we shall crucify them. So this is the statement that the chair of the committee made in the pressings of Parliament on a Saturday alone, having left his committee somewhere else. George Oraro, who was the one to whom the statement referred to, filed a defamation case. And the issue arose as to whether this conduct on the chair was protected by parliamentary privileges and immunities. The High Court found it was not, and slapped Eric Gorsungu with a bill of 3 million shillings, general damages. Gorsungu appealed. Oraro cross-appealed, saying, in fact, this award is too little. He should pay more. It is true, the Court of Appeal agreed with George Oraro and enhanced the damages to approximately 9 million shillings. I'm giving this case so that what I'm speaking here does not come across as abstract. It is real, that we need to reflect on the scope of powers, privileges, and immunities, and to act in accordance with the scope of powers, privileges, and immunities. I say this because of a number of questions that I want to ask without proffering answers. First, I know that the nature of political processes is that they can raise tensions quite a bit, and we see it both in Parliament and outside Parliament. That's the nature of politics. The nature of political processes is they raise tensions. They raise temperatures sometimes. But that does not suspend Article 73 of the Constitution that decrees that the manner in which you use your office must bring honor to that office. Allow me not to use the National Assembly or the Senate, but use the example of a county assembly of my home county of Kakamega, where members of the county assembly want to remove the speaker. And sometimes they get very frustrated. I don't know why. I keep asking them, but you have the power to remove him. Just go and vote, even vote quietly. He will leave. Once the vote has gone, when I train judges or magistrates, I keep reminding them that, no, you have power in your pen, isn't it? So don't shout at me, just write down. Just write down Ongoya is now imprisoned for 3 years. I have to go to jail. You don't need to shout at it at all. So they were so frustrated by the speaker, they decided to remove him in office quite literally. You know, removal became quite literal. So you go to the office and carry him out. Removal, the word was understood quite literally. And of course, the speaker closes himself inside the office, and they take machetes and break the office. There's a book I used to read called The Government Inspector by Nikolai Gogol. There was a teacher called the history teacher who taught his students Napoleonic Wars. And the only way he taught them how Napoleon used to fight was by picking classrooms and chairs and throwing them at the students to teach them how Napoleon used to fight. So people keep wondering, but no, those chairs are government property. You are breaking them. That door you are breaking is government property. How immune are you from the law on malicious damage to property, where you are captured actually breaking doors and so forth? I don't know whether it happens nowadays, but I think it was in the 7th or the 8th Parliament, Honorable Tangula would remind us this, when the struggle for the mess was always real. People would run for the mess itself. I don't know what material makes that mess, but I suspect it's of value. If you broke it, I don't know whether you will enjoy privileges against a criminal charge of malicious damage to property. And another thing that I must mention as I talk about this is wealth declarations. Wealth declarations. The law requires all public officers to declare their wealth to certain responsible commissions. I trust we know that. We are the lawmakers, not getting the details of that. And it requires us to make an inception declaration. I am sure you have already declared, or if not, the clerk and her staff would guide you in making the inception declaration. When you come in, you must declare what you have, because that becomes the checklist of what you have assembled as you go out, and responsible institutions may ask, in appropriate cases, ni mvua gani ilikunyeshea in the last 5 years. It also requires you to declare that wealth at intervals of 2 years. And as you exit, to also make an exit declaration. Now, failure to comply is an offense. Failure to comply is an offense. And I know that the people who actually do the coordination and the receiving of these documents and perhaps following up on you are parliamentary staff. And there is something about when you are an officer in a department dealing with the senior most, the board, so to speak, there's a way in which the respect borders on fear. So they may not push you so hard to do it. But the question that arises is whether your privilege goes to that extent. I want to say that it is always good to live a secure life because of the transcendent nature of power. That no one may do something about it when you are still wielding power and you have some use, but somebody may take some action against you when the power is gone, and therefore it's only fair that you confirm that you have complied. The point I'm emphasizing in all these words, ladies and gentlemen, is that we have power, we have privileges, we have immunities. But that power is not absolute. Those privileges, although sometimes regarded as absolute, they are only absolute in particular parameters. Once you go outside those parameters, you may find the law visiting you for that purpose, and you may find it difficult to unwriggle yourself out of it. The other option is you may only wriggle yourself out of it with the help of a lawyer, and that is sometimes extreme cost. I say so because I'm one. Let me close by just reflecting briefly on the two critical offices that I was told to make mention of, the office of the leader of majority party and the office of the leader of minority party in the National Assembly. In reference to the National Assembly, these offices are expressly referred to in the Constitution, and therefore they are important offices that extend. Now, it's important to understand the structure of our Constitution at the moment. Our Constitution created a significantly presidential system of government. When that happens, it means that you vest power in the executive and create institutions of check. immediately that happens. So you have the executive sitting outside there, but you create parliament as a check to that institution. So this constitution created two offices, the leader of majority party and the leader of minority party, to substitute the offices of what used to be the leader of government business in the House and what used to be the leader of the official opposition in the House. These offices are important because, as I would say, number one, they are mandatory members of certain committees of the House. When you go through the committee works, I'm certain that you'll get over that. If you get, and I don't want to get into the current politics about which party is the majority party and minority party, that the speaker will deal with. You have very privileged to have the speaker that you have today, because not only is he learning decision making from the House, he served as a magistrate. So he has already been inducted into decision making by the highest decision making institution in the country, the judiciary. The judiciary only makes decisions, and he has served there. I'm certain he is well equipped to deal with that. So the leader of the majority party, therefore, effectively becomes the leader of government business in the House. He brings the government agenda in the House, where the majority party is the party that forms the national executive. He therefore marshals legislative programs of government in the House, schedules legislation for floor consideration, and helps do daily, weekly, and annual legislative agenda for the executive if he comes from the party that also was privileged to constitute the executive arm of government, including marshalling the House to approve nominees to certain state offices in the executive. There are certain offices that you must approve before people take them up in the executive. He must work closely with the speaker and the party whips and consult you members and other party leaders to build consensus. I'm told diplomacy is important to get any agenda moved through the House, and that is important. He's a member of the House Business Committee, as I've said, and the Committee on Selection. He's also a member of the Committee on Appointments. Allow me just to close by looking at the leader of minority. It's also an important office. Remember, I've said it is a constitutional office. You'll find it in the Constitution first, before it's referred to in the standing orders. And among other things, he champions the minority position on issues and debates. He negotiates with the majority party, and again, I've said this, at the heart of all this is diplomacy, is negotiating, making compromises where necessary, and pushing your agenda, sometimes painstakingly, sometimes incrementally, but nevertheless, making progress. He mobilizes the minority party to exercise checks and balances on the government in cases where the majority party is the party forming the national executive and where it appears to play ball quite a bit with the executive, and also marshals the legislative programs and agenda of the national executive in the House, where the minority party then becomes the party that is forming the executive. These people cannot work in isolation. They work in tandem with other important offices in Parliament, the office of the Speaker being the head of the institution, and the whips being other critical role players in the House. Allow me to close as I began by reminding us that we have begun an important journey. We have begun a journey. Changing a society's destiny is not easy. All of us in our own small way do our own little things, whether you are a nursery school teacher, to change society's destiny. But sometimes fate and nature conspire and they put you in a vantage position. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. used to say that the arc of justice always, the arc of history always bends towards justice. The problem is, very few of us have a chance to stretch our hands high enough to reach that arc of history. Very few of us. You are among those who are privileged to have stretched your hands, and your hands have reached that arc of history. Let us collectively try to push that arc further towards justice. And may God bless you, and may God bless the Republic.